So tonight I'll be reading from Satipaṭṭhāna Meditation by Bhikkhu Analayu. Chapter 1. Mindfulness. An indispensable foundation for any Satipaṭṭhāna practice is a clear understanding of what mindfulness actually is. Here I think it is first of all important to acknowledge that there are various notions of mindfulness. Diverse understandings of this quality can be found not only among several Buddhist traditions, but also among those involved with its clinical employment. Each of these understandings has its own value and significance. In what follows, I will present my own understanding of one of these constructs of mindfulness, namely the way sati is described and reflected in the early Buddhist discourses. Throughout this book, I use mindfulness and awareness as interchangeable translations for sati, mindfulness and memory. The standard definition of mindfulness in the discourses brings in the topic of memory. It states that one who is mindful is able to remember what has been done or said long ago. At first sight, this can give the impression that mindfulness should be equated with memory. However, closer reflection shows that such an equation does not work. The problem is that distractions during meditation practice often involve some memory of the past. It is a common experience to sit down with the firm intention to be mindful, only to find that sooner or later the mind has wandered off into some past event. The arising of such episodic memories is clearly a case of loss of mindfulness, even though it involves remembering something that has been done or said long ago. Mindfulness can also be lost when we imagine something taking place in the future. Although this does not involve remembering what has been done or said long ago, daydreaming about the future still concerns aspects of memory, such as working memory and semantic memory. The experience of such distractions during meditation makes it clear that mindfulness cannot just be a form of memory. Once it has become clear that such a simple equation does not work, another explanation has to be found for appreciating the relationship between mindfulness and memory. My suggestion here is to understand that relationship as implying that the presence of mindfulness enhances and strengthens memory. Full awareness of the present moment will make it easier to recall later what has happened. Moreover, if the receptive stance of mindfulness is established at the time of recalling, it will be easier to access the required information in the mind. In this way, mindfulness can be understood to facilitate the taking in of information to be recalled as well as the subsequent successful recollection of that information. The need to understand mindfulness and memory as two closely interrelated qualities that at the same time are not identical with each other is of consequence for actual practice. Perhaps the most crucial aspect of mindfulness practice is to stay in the present moment. This is what really counts and why it is so important to distinguish clearly between mindfulness and memory. Satipaṭṭhāna meditation is not about remembering something from the past, but about being fully in the present moment. This vital distinction can to some degree be lost sight of with the understanding of mindfulness in the Theravada commentarial tradition. The commentaries consider mindfulness to be a mental quality that is invariably wholesome. The discourses, however, clearly recognize that there can be wrong types of mindfulness, miccha sati. These could hardly be considered wholesome. Yet, a discourse in the Satipaṭṭhāna Samyutta presents the four Satipaṭṭhānas as a heap of what is wholesome. In other words, mindfulness itself is not necessarily wholesome, but when mindfulness is cultivated in the form of the four Satipaṭṭhānas, then such practice does indeed become something definitely wholesome. A problem with the commentarial understanding, according to which mindfulness itself is invariably wholesome, is that contemplation of an unwholesome state of mind becomes retrospective. This is because, according to the commentarial understanding, wholesome and unwholesome qualities cannot exist simultaneously within the same state of mind. Therefore, it becomes impossible for a type of mindfulness that by definition is wholesome to coexist with an unwholesome mental condition such as lust or anger. This does not reflect what emerges from the early discourses. The instructions on Satipaṭṭhāna meditation describe being aware of lust or anger, for example, or of any of the five hindrances at the time when they are present in the mind. From this viewpoint, mindfulness can indeed remain established when an unwholesome mental condition is present. In fact, it is precisely when unwholesomeness manifests that mindfulness needs to be present. The wholesome repercussions of Satipaṭṭhāna thus do not imply that certain mental conditions are excluded from being potential objects of direct observation with mindfulness in the present moment. Instead, the point is only that such contemplation has wholesome repercussions. Such an understanding helps to preserve a key aspect of the early Buddhist conception of mindfulness, which is to be fully aware of what is happening right now. The type of mindful presence to be cultivated in this way is similar to how we would try to be alert and attentive when something takes place that we later have to remember. When walking a path for the first time with the help of a guide, for example, knowing that the next time we will have to find our way on our own, we will make an effort to notice and clearly remember which turns to take. It is this same effort, or diligence, my preferred translation for atapi, that we can bring to anything that happens. Regardless of whether we expect to need to remember later what we did, the task is invariably to be fully present, fully there, and fully aware. I will come back to the significance of the memory connotation for an appreciation of mindfulness in Chapter 9 on the awakening factors. Cultivating mindfulness. Another aspect of the early Buddhist conception of sati is that mindfulness is a mental quality that we have to bring into being. Mindfulness has to be established. It is not just a quality that is present anyway in any type of experience. This marks the difference between mindfulness and consciousness. Consciousness, as one of the five aggregates, is a continuously present process of knowing. This does not mean that consciousness is permanent. It only means that the changing flow of moments of being conscious is continuously present. Without this flow of knowing, we would not be experiencing. Whether we are mindful of a meditation object or caught up in a dream or fantasy, the flow of consciousness is always there. The same does not apply to mindfulness. In fact, the notion that there is a constantly present form of awareness which needs to be recognized and which equals the liberated mind does not square with the early Buddhist understanding of mindfulness, or of consciousness. Apparently, the outcome of a complex development with a starting point in a discourse that contrasts the luminous mind to its adventitious defilements, the resultant notion runs counter to the recurrent emphasis on impermanence in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, found in the part of the discourse I like to refer to as the refrain. Although mindfulness requires cultivation, being a quality that needs to be established, such cultivation is not a forceful matter. Here it can be useful to take into consideration that the word sati in the Pali language is feminine. My suggestion would be to relate to sati, to mindfulness, as a feminine quality. In this way, sati can be understood as receptively assimilating with the potential of giving birth to new perspectives. Right away from the moment of waking up in the morning, our good friend Sati can already be there, as if waiting for us. She is ready to accompany us throughout the rest of the day, encouraging us to stay receptive and open, soft and understanding. She never gets upset when we happen to forget about her. As soon as we remember her, she is right there to be with us again. Visualizing the practice in terms of coming back to the presence of a good friend helps to avoid mistaking sati for a forceful type of hyper-attentiveness that requires strained effort in order to be maintained. Instead, being in her presence carries the flavors of an open receptivity and a soft alertness to whatever is taking place. Mindfulness and concepts. Once established in this way, mindfulness can coexist with the employment of concepts. In fact, the instructions in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, whose function is precisely to foster the establishing of mindfulness, clearly encourage the wise use of concepts. At times, the discourse presents these concepts in quotation marks, making it clear that some form of mental verbalization is meant. I understand this to refer to the input provided by the quality of clear knowing, sampajanya, in relation to what has become evident through well-established mindfulness. The forward thrust of Satipaṭṭhāna towards liberation does not require keeping the mind free from concepts. The main task is to cultivate a free mind even in the presence of concepts. The path to such freedom is based on the skillful use of certain concepts, namely those that trigger insight. In other words, our attitude towards concepts and thoughts is best informed by the distinction between unwholesome and wholesome types. Although we need to beware of confusing actual practice with just thinking about the practice, wholesome thoughts and concepts can serve as a tool for progress, and in the form of clearly knowing, are an integral dimension of Satipaṭṭhāna meditation. The input provided by sampajanya, clearly knowing, could be illustrated with an example of yeast, due to which the dough of mindfulness practice can grow into the bread of liberating insight. Without yeast, the dough will result only in flatbread. Yeast on its own, however, will not become nourishing at all. It is when the cultivation of mindfulness comes in combination with the right amount of the yeast of clearly knowing that the tasty and nourishing bread of insight will result. Regarding the role of concepts, it also needs to be kept in mind that a distinction between concepts and ultimate realities is not found in the early Buddhist discourses. For those who practice according to the methodology of the Theravada commentarial tradition, this distinction is of considerable importance and has its practical benefits. However, for the type of practice that I present here, it would be helpful to set aside this mode of thinking. In the early discourses, tranquility and insight are not distinguished according to whether our meditation object is a concept or what is considered to be an ultimate reality. In fact, tranquility and insight are not even set apart as separate meditation practices. Instead, they are complementary qualities of meditative cultivation. Some practices can emphasize one or the other of these two, and with still others, tranquility and insight can be cultivated in conjunction. The only ultimate reality recognized in early Buddhism is Nibbana. This is the one experience where concepts indeed do not have a place. For the path leading up to this culmination point in the experience of Nibbana, however, concepts are useful tools. The need for concepts is also to some degree implicit in a passage in the Mahanidana Sutta, which describes experience as involving a relationship of reciprocal conditioning between consciousness and name and form. Here, name stands for those mental activities responsible for conceptual designation, and form for the experience of matter by way of resistance. Both together are known by consciousness. From the viewpoint of early Buddhist epistemology, insight into matter cannot take place without name, without at least a minimal input of concept. Only dead matter impinging on dead matter will be free from concepts. But for us to cultivate insight into the true nature of material phenomena, some form of contact by way of designation is required. In the case of contemplation of the body, as the first Satipaṭṭhāna, for example, the task is not to break through to an ultimately true experience of the body that leaves behind all concepts. Instead, the task is to see through deluding concepts with the help of wise concepts. This takes place by cultivating clearly knowing in conjunction with mindfulness. In short, not only can early Buddhist mindfulness coexist with the use of concepts, Satipaṭṭhāna meditation even has to employ concepts in order to lead to liberation. Mindfulness and receptivity. Another significant aspect of mindfulness is what I like to refer to as breadth of mind. With breadth of mind, I mean an open-minded and broadly receptive attitude. This type of open receptivity can be illustrated with the help of the cowherd simile found in the Deda Vitaka Sutta. This simile describes a cowherd in ancient India in two situations. In the first situation, the crops are ripe. The cowherd has to watch over the cows with close vigilance to prevent them from straying into and feasting on the ripe crops. Once the crops have been harvested, however, the cowherd can relax and just observe the cows from a distance. All he has to do is be aware that there are the cows. For this distant watching, the simile uses the term sati. I picture the cowherd sitting relaxed at the root of a tree and watching the cows grazing in various places. All he has to do is just be aware of them from an uninvolved distance. Needless to say, the cowherd will not get awakened by just being aware of the cows. More than just being mindful is required for that. This is precisely where clearly knowing, sampajanya, comes in to plant the seeds of wisdom in the fertile soil of mindful observation. In terms of my earlier simile, without the yeast of clearly knowing, the dough of mindfulness practice will result only in flatbread. The wise input provided by clearly knowing marks the difference from the cowherd's mindfulness. Although the cowherd lacks the crucial wisdom part, observing the cows from a distance is nevertheless a good illustration of the receptivity and breadth of mind that I consider to be an important dimension of mindfulness. The cowherd simile is not alone in conveying this sense. Another relevant discourse is the Mahātmya-saṅkhāya Sutta, which relates a narrow state of mind to being without mindfulness of the body. However, a state of mind that is broad, even boundless, comes with mindfulness of the body established. Here, the presence of mindfulness of the body clearly relates to a broad state of mind. The importance of this breadth of mind lies in the comprehensiveness of vision that results from such an open-minded attitude. This is somewhat like taking a picture with a wide-angle lens. Such wide-angle openness allows mental space for differences to exist side by side. The resultant mental spaciousness stands in contrast to the narrow-mindedness of being firmly convinced that our particular view or understanding is the only right one. This does not mean that we are no longer entitled to have an opinion. It does mean, however, that our personal opinions are seen for what they are, just opinions which may or may not be correct. We learn to allow space for diversity to unfold without suppression or negativity. With a bit of mindful observation, we can in fact easily notice how spacious and allowing the mind can be when we are open to differences and variety, and how narrow and cramped the mind can become when we are self-righteous and judgmental. Becoming aware of this difference can serve as a good signpost for noticing when the mind shifts from open-mindedness to closing down. Combining an open-minded attitude with being fully in the present moment requires some form of an anchor. It is a common experience that mindfulness is lost and the mind succumbs to some sort of distraction or fantasy. The challenge here is to find an anchor that supports the continuity of mindfulness without losing the qualities of open-mindedness and receptivity. In other words, the anchor should be established without introducing too strong a focus and without too much of an interfering and controlling attitude. In my personal experience, I have found the most helpful tool to meet this challenge to be the type of mindfulness mentioned in the Mahātmya-saṅkhāya Sutta, mindfulness of the body. In simple terms, mindfulness of the body means a form of mindfulness that in one way or another relates to aspects of the body or to the body as a whole. Needless to say, both modes are interrelated. Becoming aware of parts of the body strengthens the whole body awareness, just as awareness of the whole body easily leads over to awareness of its different parts. Given the need to avoid too strong a focus, however, the mode of mindfulness of the body that recommends itself for serving as an anchor is awareness of the whole physical body. Mindfulness of bodily postures. Mindfulness of the whole body can be related to two contemplations in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, which describe being aware of the bodily postures and clearly knowing the bodily activities. The instructions for the first of these two are as follows. When walking, one knows, I am walking. Or when standing, one knows, I am standing. Or when sitting, one knows, I am sitting. Or when lying down, one knows, I am lying down. Or, however the body is disposed, one knows it accordingly. The passage is not about performing any of these postures in a special way, such as doing slow motion walking meditation, but just about knowing the postures of the body as they occur naturally. To my mind, this conveys the sense of a continuity of awareness of the body combined with clearly knowing its posture. It is something natural and without artificiality. And in fact, the naturalness helps to avoid going into autopilot mode. This can easily happen when we train ourselves to do something invariably in a particular manner. Natural walking is also what I would recommend for walking meditation by way of just resting in whole body awareness during the walking process. When walking, we just walk with our whole being. The ability to know if the body is in one of these four postures relies on what clinical psychology calls proprioceptive awareness. The term proprioception refers to the ability to sense the position of the body and its movements. Even with closed eyes, we are able to know the position of our body through this type of ability. It is a felt sense of physical presence. This felt physical presence provides an easily available sense of here, and mindfulness itself keeps us in the now. In this way, mindfulness of the body can combine spatial and temporal dimensions that facilitate our being fully in the here and now. During normal daily life, this felt sense of physical presence is usually not noticed. It quickly becomes to the forefront of attention, however, when the bodily balance is lost. Meditative cultivation of this felt sense of physical presence can take place by being aware of the body in any posture. This requires allowing this natural ability of proprioceptive awareness to become a recognized aspect of our experience. In this way, neither is it ignored, as usually, nor does it take up the whole field of attention, as is the case when a loss of bodily balance occurs. Such meditative cultivation is not a forceful grabbing hold of the body, but rather a resting in the presence of the whole body. The phrase I tend to use to introduce the flavor of this practice is, we are aware of the body in the sitting posture, and we let the mind rest on the body, just as the body rests on the cushion. Properly cultivated, such mindfulness of the body results in a sense of being firmly grounded in the body. It is an embodied awareness. Such embodied awareness does not need to interfere with other tasks and activities. Instead, it can accompany them. To accomplish this takes training. The natural tendency of the mind is either to focus or ignore. Proprioceptive awareness can be employed to cultivate a middle path between these two extremes. Cultivating this middle path comes about by way of a gradual approach rather than through mere force of will. Once the centering and balancing potential of mindfulness of the body has become a matter of personal experience, it becomes easier to return to the body amidst the most challenging situations. The body is always there, wherefore turning mindfulness towards it can serve almost like a portable meditation device, ready at hand in any situation. All it takes is to become aware of some part of the body, and from that entry door to allow mindfulness to encompass the whole body, enabling the mind to rest in that encompassing awareness as its reference point. This in itself is a simple act of turning with awareness to the presence of the body, can transform the most boring types of situation into opportunities for practice. Caught up in a traffic jam, sitting in the doctor's waiting room, standing in a long queue at passport control, any such setting can be transformed by embodied mindfulness. Such is the power of this middle path between exclusive focus and distraction. Advantages of cultivating this middle path are stability and continuity of mindfulness. It enables bridging the gap between formal meditation during a retreat or sitting period and everyday activities. This is decisive. For meditation practice to flourish truly, formal sitting and everyday life have to evolve into an integrated whole, each supporting the other. This can be achieved by finding a way of maintaining the presence of mindfulness, regardless of what needs to be done. When outer circumstances make continuity of mindfulness difficult, it can be helpful to use a phrase from the part of the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta I call the refrain. The relevant part reads, mindfulness is established that there is the body. Just bringing to mind this phrase, there is the body, or its poly-equivalent, ati kayo, can help to reestablish mindfulness of the body and to support its continuity. The same type of phrase can also be used for the domains of the other Satipaṭṭhānas. If the situation at hand gives rise to prominent feelings, for example, the mental phrase to be used could be, there is feeling, ati vedana. A good way to get a practical sense of what it means to cultivate such an embodied awareness would be taking a walk in a forest. Walking in the forest, can we just walk in the forest? Is it possible to be fully with the present moment of walking? For the time being, can we leave behind all of our concerns and duties, our roles and identities, as well as the ever-active mental commentator within? When walking in the forest, can we just know that we are walking? Based on the resultant rootedness in the act of walking, can we allow the mind to be wide open and receptive to the beauty of nature around us? Establishing continuity of awareness in the 4 postures builds the foundation for the next exercise described in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, which is clearly knowing in relation to various bodily activities. In this context, clearly knowing refers to a general sense of appropriatedness and propriety. The same quality also occurs in the part of the discourse that I like to call the definition. In that context, clearly knowing seems to have a more specific purpose, which I understand to be in particular to serve as a reminder of the changing nature of all aspects of experience. In terms of my earlier simile, the clearly knowing mentioned in the definition is the yeast required for the bread of insight. Mindfulness of bodily activities. The instructions in the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta for the type of clearly knowing that is relevant to various bodily activities proceed as follows. When going forward and returning, one acts clearly knowing. When looking ahead and looking away, one acts clearly knowing. When flexing and extending the limbs, one acts clearly knowing. When wearing the outer robe and other robes and carrying the bowl, one acts clearly knowing. When eating, drinking, consuming food, and tasting, one acts clearly knowing. When defecating and urinating, one acts clearly knowing. When walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and keeping silent, one acts clearly knowing. Aspects of this description relate in particular to the lifestyle of a monastic, but by understanding robes to be representative of clothing in general, and the bowl to stand in place of any tool to be used, the description can be related to lay practice as well. Clearly knowing, sampajanya, has its foundation in the presence of mindfulness. It is only when we are aware of what we are doing that we can do it clearly knowing. The activities described are going somewhere and looking at something, moving our limbs in one way or another, wearing our clothes, eating and drinking, defecating and urinating, going to sleep and waking up, even talking and being silent. Clearly, the exercise is meant to embrace all possible kinds of situation. In other words, any situation or activity can, in principle, become food for mindfulness and clearly knowing. When turning around to look at something, the Buddha is described as turning around with his whole body, similar to an elephant. This exemplifies wholehearted dedication to an action. Can we eat with our whole body? Can we obey the calls of nature with our whole body? Bringing this fullness of being into any activity has considerable potential. It makes us become more alive. We learn to cultivate the subtle joy of being fully in the present moment through such embodied mindfulness. Waking up in the morning, can we start right away by being aware of the whole body? Before getting into any other activity, we can take a few moments just to be aware of the body lying in the bed. Getting up then involves the other 3 postures. From lying down, we proceed to sitting, standing, and then walking. In this way, we can begin the day with a check-in on the whole body awareness in all 4 postures, which will enable us to continue the day with a good grounding in embodied mindfulness. Having established such a foundation, it becomes easier to return to mindfulness throughout the day until the time comes to rest again. At that time, we proceed through the same 4 postures in reverse order, walking to reach the bed, standing by its side, sitting down on it, and eventually lying down. All this can be done with whole body awareness until we fall asleep. Probably the most challenging of the activities mentioned in the passage above is talking. I propose to understand talking here to cover any type of communication, including the use of email and internet. The mind can get so active and involved in these activities that we easily forget about mindfulness of the body. Yet, to come back to it only requires a moment of turning inward and becoming aware of the body. Whole body awareness can in principle remain present in the background of any activity, including even the most heated discussion. Nevertheless, a heated discussion is probably a rather challenging situation and not the best place to get started with this type of practice. It would be preferable to bring mindfulness gradually into daily activities and situations in order to avoid frustration arising and undermining our dedication to this crucial dimension of the practice. The outside world offers us a testing ground where we can check on and mature the insights gained in formal meditation. We need to avoid creating a rigid division between formal meditation and ordinary activities. But this testing ground in the world outside is better not seen as a sort of exam which we pass or else become an utter failure. Instead, it is preferable to visualize it more as a playground where we can try out different tactics to see what works for us. From this perspective, it simply works better if we approach everyday situations with a relaxed inner smile, considering whatever occurs as a chance for testing out different ways of being with sati. In order to get started, we might just try to be mindful from time to time without immediately aiming at uninterrupted continuity when hearing or reading the communications of others. Hearing or reading are in themselves more passive activities and therefore more easily amenable to being combined with the receptive and non-interfering attitude of sati. Grounded in whole body awareness, we try to remain balanced and aware of what others are expressing. Every moment we are mindful is a gain, as in this way we have taken another step in the right direction. No need to berate ourselves for those moments when mindfulness was lost. Distraction and getting caught up is a natural tendency of the mind, but every single step taken in the other direction will slowly weaken this tendency. Experimenting for some time with adorning our lives step by step with the beauty of moments of embodied mindfulness will yield plainly evident benefits in our ability to understand and interact better with others. We also become better at distinguishing between what others express and how this comes to be colored by our own commentary on it, how our biases tend to interfere even when just hearing or reading. This in turn makes us notice how our own mind wants to react. With the growth of this understanding, we in turn feel sufficiently fortified to extend the practice further by trying to be with mindfulness even when we are actually reacting, be it by writing a message or by saying something. When moving into this more challenging arena of what is yet another dimension of our meditative training, it can be helpful to take a conscious breath that reconnects us with our bodily experience before we begin to write or speak. Hardly noticeable to others, such brief reconnection with a mindful grounding in the body can serve as an inner switch to get our meditative attitude in operation. This meditative attitude can turn any experience, be it at the workplace or at home, into an integral dimension of our progress on the path. A bit more in the chapter, but I think I'll end there for this evening. I'll move on to the question and answer portion.
Unfortunately, I'm still unclear on the difference between clear knowing and mindfulness.
I don't think you need to figure it out. You just keep practicing. You just tie yourself up in knots with it.
Yeah.
Keep trying to be as clear and comfortable, relaxed as possible.
Thanks for the reading, Anagarika, Andrew. It seems to me like our minds are almost like a computer, like a computer freezes up. And it's actually, the computer is actually trying to process something, and it seems like it's not doing anything, but it's just like stuck because it's doing a lot just on one thing, kind of like a bug in the system. And I wonder with like mindfulness, if you have a really strong thought or something you want to solve, is it better to try to eliminate that first? Because even if you are mindful and then you kind of go back to your daily being, that thought will come back and you're stuck in a loop. So kind of like just cut it by the roots and try to investigate it and see the emptiness of that thought that's, that is like making you stuck.
It's kind of whatever works. You have to be willing to experiment, because sometimes you just like going to it and really, really figuring it out is really helpful. And one can get engaged with it, but sometimes, there's just, you're sort of grinding your gears, and it's helpful just to step out of it somehow and come, and there's all, and establish mindfulness on something else, or take a different object, and then all of a sudden you get an insight into what you were obsessing over, or what was causing the problem. So there's not a one particular exact way that's going to work, but what really does work is interest. In that sense of, okay, how do I work with this?
Is there a name for that practice of like trying to find the root of a problem and then not getting stuck with it, right? Because then there's also the danger of getting attached with it and you're just looping, but really being able to let that go. Is there like a Pali name for that or a practice?
Nothing's coming to my mind. Yeah, that's actually a really good Yoniso Manasikara is a really good Pali term to be familiarized with oneself, and it comes up in the suttas over and over and over again as a fundamental wholesome quality that is an aid to both clarity and insight. And literally, it has many different translations: wise attention, considered reflection, skillful attention. Manasikara is like attention, attending to an object, and yoniso is going to the root of something. So that yoni is in Pali and Sanskrit is the womb. So that going to the source, going to the where things are born, where things arise from. So that is a very important mental quality to be attending to and learning how to exercise.
A little funny story. I was talking to Tanyasa. It was like keeping him from taking a shower. And I told him I was on a retreat, and I had kind of a argument with my dad. And I think it was like a 10-day retreat, and like for the 6 days I was just like self-righteous because like he told me not to do something, and I did it anyway, but it worked out. And then all of a sudden on the 6th day I was like, oh my God, I cannot listen to myself anymore. I'm so sick of myself, right? And it was almost like a female or feminine energy that was like, Manny, everything's okay. Like, just let it go. And the reading, sati, that mindfulness and having a female aspect to it, I was like, wow, okay, that I can really relate to that.
It is an important aspect of it. It is your sati is not some sort of hard driving, forceful. There is a receptive quality to it.
More or less going to comment on that same idea of like getting to the root of a problem. Sometimes getting to the root isn't necessarily through incisive, sharp, hard, focused, deliberate kind of conceptual process. Getting to the root. Like I often find that if I've got some sort of problem or dilemma or whatever, it is best to kind of step back and use my right brain. I mean, for want of a better description, right brain versus left brain, which is not exactly the best, most accurate kind of way of dividing it up. But sometimes that broad, receptive, open perspective that isn't like trying to get to the root, but just aware generally of the problem, and just sitting with it and allowing the mind to open and expand and broaden. Then all of a sudden it comes in, from a different angle. The answer does, and it's not through any kind of focused deliberation. It's through opening up to, the possibilities to come in a more easeful, receptive way.